Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Rural Food Banking in California, Challenges and Solutions in Transportation, Storage, and Distribution of Healthy Foods. It is 3:58 Eastern Time, 12:58 Pacific Time, and so we will start in 2 minutes. So we look forward to a great webinar.
Thank you, Liz.
Again, for those of you who are just joining, we are going to start at 1 p.m. Pacific Time on the dot, so we are going to get started. Oh, it just changed. It's 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Liz Campbell, and I'll be your moderator today. I am a food security and nutrition consultant who works with the Nutrition Policy Institute through the University of California. And we are delighted today to share with you the webinar entitled Rural Food Banking in California, Challenges and Solutions in Transportation, Storage, and Distribution of Healthy Foods. And before we get started, we really just want to take a moment to thank our partners, the California Association of Food Banks, and specifically Terry Garner, who's on this webinar as well, for partnering with us and helping to promote some of the information that we're about to share today. So thank you so much, Terry, for letting us use your platform and to be able to share this information. We had about, we actually had over 50 people sign up for the webinar with a wide range of folks, everyone from agencies to food banks and nutrition educators. So we're excited that we have a diverse group of people who are interested in food security in their local community. This webinar is 75 minutes long. And before we get into housekeeping, I just want to introduce our panelists. So first, we have Laura Vollmer, who is a research specialist at the Nutrition Policy Institute, so a colleague of mine. She's long pursued an interest in food security and the charitable food assistance system. She actually was a staffer at City Harvest, which is a Feeding America affiliate in New York City, where she was a grant writer. And then more recently, she has been working with the team at the Nutrition Policy Institute to create resources and do research around improving the nutrition quality of foods distributed through the Charitable Food Network. Karen Webb, who we have here as well, is not actually going to be able to make it onto the webinar. She just recently retired, but Karen also is a great team member at NPI who's been doing this work now for about 10 years, and so she is always available, even though she's technically retired. She is still well involved with the team at NPI. I'm also happy to introduce two great folks from the field who are working in food banking. We have Peter Ricardo, who is the Product Donations Manager at the Food Bank of Central New York, and Sherry Atwell, who's the Director of Produce Recovery at Feeding Florida, which is the Association of Food Banks in the state of Florida. So now back to housekeeping. I just want to let everyone know that it's 75 minutes long, and although we will be speaking, you all who are in attendance are actually on mute. But that doesn't mean that we don't want you to be interactive and engaged, and so we really want folks to be typing in questions in the question box if you have anything that you are interested in getting additional information or clarification while our presenters are presenting. So for those of you who are on right now, if you don't mind, let's just test the question box out so people feel comfortable using it. So at the bottom of your control panel, you should see where you can type in questions, and just go ahead and type in there where you're from, what organization you're from, and that way we know that you all are able to hear, first of all, and that you're ready to be engaged and participate in the conversation. So don't be shy. Oh, look, we have folks from Humboldt County, we have folks from public health organizations, we have folks from the University of California, we have folks from Nevada County Public Health. So thank you for indulging me. Please continue to use the question box. We would love to hear from you and make sure that you're getting out of this webinar what you would like to get out of this webinar. Okay. So now let's just review our agenda. Today we're here to talk about the Rural Food Bank Assessment that the Nutrition Policy Institute conducted on behalf of the California Association of Food Banks. And then from that assessment, we had a little bit of funding to do some expert interviews with folks across the country to try to gather information about good practices around transportation and storage that we'd like to share with you today. And then we're going to hear from Peter and Sherry. We're going to actually hear from people in the field in other parts of the country outside of California who are doing some neat, innovative things that we thought were definitely worthwhile to share with the California network. And then hopefully for folks who are on, we can do at the end of the webinar, just do a little brainstorming through the question box of what you think you can do with this information and go back to your local communities and help support remote and rural food banks and the California Association of Food Banks moving forward. We thought this was a great opportunity to share information with a large group of people and see, what you all think and how you think you might be able to apply this back in your local communities. Okay, so let's start off the webinar with Laura Vollmer, who's going to give an overview of the Rural Food Bank Assessment. Laura, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Liz. So as Liz said, today I'll be sharing a pretty brief overview of the needs assessment we did for CAFB of their remote and rural members. And before I get started, I want to say that both an executive summary and the full report is available on both CAFB's website as well as the Nutrition Policy Institute's website. So we do encourage you to check it out. But the objective of the needs assessment was to identify strengths, challenges, and needs of those remote and rural members, and to make recommendations to address those challenges, as well as to increase capacity to meet community need. And we incorporated both ideas from the food banks themselves, as well as additional recommendations. And for the needs assessment, we used a number of different methods. We surveyed members. We also visited each food bank to conduct interviews and observations. And we also developed service area profiles to capture demographic information about the areas each member serves. And there were 15 food banks in the sample, and together they served 22 counties spanning the whole state. So all the way from Del Norte in the north, all the way down through Imperial in the south. And we found terrific diversity in terms of budget, staff, and organizational structure. And you can see that summarized here on the slide. So annual budgets range from $150,000 on the lower end to nearly $2 million on the higher end. Some food banks had no paid staff, and on the high end, one food bank employed 23 people. There was also great diversity in terms of location and how remote and or rural the food banks were, and that also includes sort of access to major transportation routes. There was also diversity in organizational structure. So the vast majority were standalone 501c3 or nonprofit organizations. A chunk were part of community action agencies, and one, interestingly, was affiliated with a healthcare system. So turning now to some key findings. We grouped the findings by topic area, and here's the first, fundraising. Fundraising is a significant challenge for every food bank in the assessment, and many food banks told us that it was much easier to obtain funds for food and capital expenses rather than for operating costs such as salaries and benefits, utilities, and vehicle maintenance and fuel. In other words, those things that sort of keep the food bank running in a daily way. Many of the food banks also cited limited access to a robust donor pool, as well as competing demands on the executive director's time for fundraising, and limited success with access to grant opportunities through Feeding America, as well as obtaining cash donations from growers who are often sort of wealthier members of the community, but also provide donations of food as well. I wanted to highlight just a couple of positive practices. One food bank that we heard from had figured out a way to implement an automatic payroll deduction to help fund a backpack program. Another had, I thought this was such a wonderful idea, had figured out how to reach what they called expats, or folks who grew up in the rural area but had since moved to an urban area as one fundraising source. So some interesting things, and there's much more in the report about that. On the client services front, most food banks we found offered some level of nutrition education, client referrals, and then a smaller subset also conducted CalFresh outreach. And another positive practice to highlight here, 2 of the food banks that we spoke with have received county funding specifically to conduct CalFresh outreach, and that has been regarded as a win-win from both the county's perspective as well as from the food bank's perspective. It's also interesting to note here that some of the food bankers we spoke with saw or identified nutrition education as a key way to increase produce consumption. So moving over to issues of capacity. On the facilities and equipment front, many food banks reported challenges with the amount of storage they had access to, and that included dry, refrigerated, and freezer space. And some cited even having to speed up distributions or dump food given that shortage of storage space. Some food banks we spoke with use narrow freight cars that have been converted to coolers or freezers. However, that can require significant labor in the form of pallet shuffling and rotation to distribute food on a first in, first out basis. Also interesting, insufficient vehicles was not a major challenge that was identified by food banks. So on to the recommendations. We generated more than 70 recommendations, all of which can be read in the report, and they're organized by the headers that you see here on the slide. And it's worth noting that some of the recommendations that were highlighted in the report have already been put into practice. And just to give you a quick flavor for what some of those recommendations are, so under fundraising, we recommended engaging in collaborative grants to address common needs across multiple food banks. On the nutritional quality of food front, we recommended providing training for food banks and conducting what are called virtual food drives to obtain cash contributions that support purchasing foods of choice, as opposed to utilizing those community food drive barrels. Related to transportation, we recommended exploring commercial trucking partnerships to backhaul food when trucks have no cargo on return trips. And on the leadership front, we suggested training, orientations, and networking to help new EDs and food bank managers, quote unquote, learn the ropes. And on the same page that you'll find our needs assessment on the California Association of Food Banks website, there's also some training modules that have been developed by folks in the remote and rural network. And with that sort of broad introduction to our needs assessment, I'll hand it back over to Liz.
Great. Thanks so much, Laura. We had a few questions come in for you, Laura. The first one is if folks have questions for Laura, please feel free to type them in the question box. But the first question was, in your report, do you have the actual interview questions and protocol, all of the instruments that you use to conduct the assessment that folks could take a look at and maybe tweak or tailor for their own purposes?
Uh-oh, Liz, do you remember?
I do think we have an appendix that has the instruments in the back.
And if you don't, we're certainly happy to make it available via email.
Right. Fair enough. I'm pretty sure it's in there, but if not, you can definitely email Laura, and she can send you. We are happy to share with folks. And then I just wanted to remind people that we are actually recording this webinar, and we'll work with Terry and the folks at the California Association of Food Banks to let you know where it can be accessed and posted. So just bear with us. We have to work out some of those details between our organizations, but once we do have it posted, we will send it out to the same networks where we advertise the webinar. So we will have this information available for folks. Great. Well, thanks, Laura, and keep typing in questions. If folks have more questions, I'm happy to address them. But for the sake of time, we're going to move to the next part of the presentation, and I'll try to do 1 or 2 questions in between presenters, and then we have about 10 minutes at the end of our webinar for getting to all the additional questions that are asked. So based on what Laura has shared with folks, we noted that there were challenges around transportation and storage that came out of the assessment. And because of this, we had a little bit of money at the Nutrition Policy Institute where we were able to do some expert interviews with folks across the country and just see if we could document good practices or innovative ideas that were not already happening in California, right? California is often, in the case with most things, you know, a leader in the country. And so we tried to reach out to folks and see if there was any additional or innovative ideas out there that we could bring back to the folks in California and share. So with that, because of the assessment that happened in 2016, we conducted these expert interviews, and we really did find a few things that we thought were very interesting to share with you all, and wanted to not only share with you some of our findings, and again, we have two small reports coming out of these interviews that we'll also post along with the assessment. But we wanted to share with you not only our findings, but actually have you hear from people who are doing those things across the country. And so I will go through my slides quickly so you can hear from Peter and Sherry. So the methods were, participants were recruited for interviews using a snowball sampling, where basically where known experts in the field were contacted for interviews, and then they recommended additional participants who could provide new information. The interview protocol focused on a few central questions around innovation and good practices in relation to transportation, storage, and partnerships. And these were all phone interviews that were conducted, and they lasted between 30 minutes to an hour. And for those of you who are interested in the methods and the instruments, we will have those questions that we used available through this report as well. My slides are not forwarding. Okay, so we ended up doing a total of 8 interviews, and here's the breakdown of the respondents. We had one government funder. So in New York State, there is actually state funding that is allocated to all 8 food banks in the state. And so we interviewed the government funder, which is called the Hunger Prevention Nutrition Assistance Program, as part of our expert interview process. We also spoke to a director of a state association, and this was Sherry's boss, Robin, who we spoke to. Mostly we chose Florida because of the similarities in growing seasons between California and Florida, and the fact that both states produce so much produce. We thought we might be able to have some lessons come out of those interviews. Then we spoke to 3 food bank staff. And then we also spoke to 3 Feeding America staff whose expertise or focus area was around transportation, storage, and produce. So here are our findings from the interviews. And we have it portioned out into agency solution and other solutions. we thought we would share this with folks in California just as a jumping off point for discussion. So under storage, something that was really interesting that folks were talking about at the national level is the concept of using vending machines. And we know for sure that there are vending machine initiatives that are happening in the United Kingdom where fruit sandwiches, energy bars, clean socks, toothbrushes, and other necessities are available in public locations where vending machines are easy to access at any time during the day. And the way that they work is that everything is free inside the vending machine and people have access through a key card that's actually distributed by local organizations. So when we were hearing folks talking about difficulties with storage or reaching certain communities, this was a potential solution that we thought worth bringing up for folks to discuss of what that could potentially look like in remote and rural areas in California. It's interesting, the volunteers restock the vending machines, and so folks are really highlighting the fact that it's something that folks who are the working poor who are looking for help at the food pantries may be able to access at any time of the day. The other partner agency solution that we wanted to highlight was storage annexes. And there were a few food banks in California who were doing this. But in particular, what we wanted to highlight was Peter Ricardo and his storage annex story, because not only is the storage annex unique, but the way that he went about getting funding to fund the storage annexes, I think was a great story and something that we want to share with folks in California. And then we also had mobile pantries as a solution for storage. But again, this is just validating that folks in California are already ahead of this trend in doing it as well. Excuse me. So moving into transportation, things that were interesting from our interviews that we learned about that we documented as good practice was looking at direct pickups. So for those of you who are not very familiar with the Emergency Food Network, traditionally, food would come to a food bank and then go back out to partner agencies. And given that the challenge of remote and rural food banks, that the transportation to and then back out to the community is difficult. So something that food banks across the country are doing, and some California food banks are doing as well, is working out relationship with their partner agencies to have direct pickup at the stores or locations that have donations. Now, that's not necessarily a new trend, but the new twist on it that we think is worth sharing and for folks to be talking about is the connection of technology to this. So there's a group that's working that's called DASH. So it's Project DASH, which is DoorDash Acts for Sustainability and Hunger, who's partnering nationally with Feeding America through an app called Meal Connect. And basically, Meal Connect allows donors, especially like local restaurants or local smaller organizations, to take pictures of donations and post them so that food banks, partner agencies, and other organizations who are approved and part of the network that who are in agreement to work together can then access that food. And then that way, the food bank can still maintain the good donor relationship. It can train partners in food safety and proper handling, but it can eliminate some of that time lost for transportation and storage, especially with perishable items. So the new twist on this is what app and technology already exist and what apps and technology could we consider developing in California given our great connection to the tech sector in California. So again, these are just things that we wanted to bring up to start the conversation. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is storage and transportation through partner agency tiering. So all three food banks that we spoke to said that it was really difficult to figure out how to best use their resources. And what is very interesting is we talked to the food banks and they basically tiered their partner agencies as high capacity down to low capacity. And they started to build stronger relationships with those folks who are high capacity partner agencies. So that meaning they have storage capability, that they have open hours, they may have paid staff, and seeing how those folks who might be further out in the community could partner with some of the other agencies in that area that had fewer resources or less capacity, and almost use these larger partner agencies as hubs that could help service some of the smaller agencies in that area. So almost having a mini food bank hub within the community that could be identified with a larger, higher capacity partner agency. And then lastly was innovative partnerships. And I actually have a slide where I just want to highlight some of the innovative partnerships that we learned about through our interviews. Now, again, some of these things are things that California is already doing, but three things that I really wanted to point out was the food cooler frozen company partnerships, the government partnerships, and the tractor trailer school partnerships as things that California may want to consider exploring or maybe even consider doing a little differently. So in the food cooler frozen company partnership, when folks were having a hard time reaching certain community members with donated product, they started working with their wholesaler vendors and becoming running parallel, not in the same way that they would use their donated food, but running food buying clubs. So essentially working with wholesalers, cutting out the middle store markup, and trying to create packages of nutritious food items that then could be transported to maybe a partner agency for pickup, where folks would be able to use their SNAP benefits. So this is separate from their donated food process. This would be, for a for sale product that folks would have to use their money to purchase. But it was a great way to establish a relationship with the wholesale food folks, who then hopefully, when they did have product to donate, their first call would be those food banks who that they're in a business relationship with. So we have more information about the food buying clubs in the report, but we just thought we would highlight that as an opportunity to partner. The other partnership that was very interesting was government partners. And we had three examples of government partners, and actually Sherry is going to talk a lot about her government partnership as a disaster relief partner, and how food banks could step in to play that role. So that was very interesting, working with FEMA and other state disaster relief folks. And Peter is going to be talking about the goals of the Department of Environmental Conservation. Each state is named slightly different, is to reduce food waste as well. It's a big global initiative of reducing waste, and seeing how food banks might be able to partner with this new department in government and see where there are funding opportunities and synergies. And then the last thing is just highlighting that there are states, like New York State, for example, that have state funds that are associated directly with funding food banks, but that they actually come through their Department of Health and have nutrition guidelines attached to it. As another way to address the food system is investing in the Emergency Food Charitable Food Network, and making sure that they're putting out higher quality food because they're able to give some funding to help that. And then lastly, we thought it was really interesting. We had a food banker in Arkansas who had a local tractor trailer training school near their food bank, and they partnered with them so much so that their training program includes loading up the tractor trailers and driving deliveries for the food bank, which for many remote and rural food banks, labor costs for transportation are huge, given that the distance is often very far. So being able to touch base with tractor trailer schools or others who might be able to use their fleet to help support your work was a really interesting practice that we wanted to highlight for folks. So I'm going to stop there. again, we're just touching upon some of the findings because I think you really just want to hear from the folks in the field, most. But again, we will be able to post this report when it's finalized, and we'll share it with the networks that we contacted to promote the webinar as well. All right. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over now to Peter Ricardo from the Food Bank of Central New York, and he's going to talk about his storage annex project and how he got that funded. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you, Liz. I was muted there. You hearing me?
I can hear you, yeah. Yep.
Very good. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite things, what I've been doing. But the Food Bank of Central New York Pantry Annex Cold Trailer is what we basically call this unit. And Liz, you can leave it on this slide, and I'll just do a little background.
Sure.
So I've been food sourcing for about 14 years, and folks out there that are doing the same thing know that our most frustrating day is when we can pull in product and just have the outstream is not keeping up with the instream. This has been the elephant in the room for a lot of us for quite a while. So, oh boy, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was trying to work out how can we enhance the endpoint, enhance the pantries to be more robust and powerful with that distribution piece without just throwing another truck and driver on our payroll, on our schedule. That seems to have been the go-to solution for a few years, and it was getting unwieldy. So I started working on an idea to have a mobile walk-in cooler, basically, which involves some projects with Syracuse University's Industrial Design Department. They came up with some kind of cool but wacky ideas that weren't really achievable. And I really wanted this thing to be community-driven, take the food bank out of the picture somewhat, except for supplying the product, which is when we got to go ahead and flip a slide, Liz. And so, obviously the feedback from agencies and programs were, sure, if you could come up with a temporary space, we would love that and make use of it. And coincidentally, at this time, I was hearing about some seminars in our area from the Department of Environmental Conservation. I think you have a DEC in California, or it might be environmental quality, something like that, but it's through the EPA. And they were advertising some seminars. They're all very motivated. They have been for years to try to get organics out of the waste stream. And I was seeing these, the itinerary mentioning methane producers, composters, animal feeders, and I was like, whoa, where's food banking in here? This is making me nervous. So I registered and went to this organic summit in New York State, and I was amazed that when I got there, I was the only food banker in the room. Several hundred people, a lot of people from those industries I mentioned, and just me from food banking. So I was like, well, this is interesting. And that, you can go ahead and skip, Liz. So I attended this conference, which out of that conference was given a, whoops. Sorry, we were, from that conference grew this initiative of Governor Cuomo to have capital for a day in several cities. That was kind of a follow-up to being at that seminar. And basically, we had a bunch of people from the DEC and a group called NYSAR, which is New York State Reuse Recycle, to hear pitches for some grant money. Folks were in there, of course, pitching everything from methane digesters, power generation, countywide compost facilities, $500,000, $2 million projects. When, I kind of raised my hand and came out with my idea for a mobile walk-in, which was I was looking for 25,000. So fast forward, that it came back. Several months transpired, but basically, I applied and I got a response that, we love your idea for the trailer. Here's 75,000. Why don't you build 3? So obviously, was thrilled. I was stunned. Go ahead, Liz. And we ended up with this pantry annex cold trailer, or packed, which, come on, packed with food, packed with partnerships in the community. So we got we did the name, we did the graphics, and basically the unit, and right here in this particular shot, it looks kind of short. It just got compressed a little bit, but we ended up with a company in Pennsylvania. This is New York State money. I really tried in New York State to find a partner that could build this unit, but nobody was coming forward that gave me any confidence. And this is we ended up with a 16-foot trailer, 8 feet wide, 8 feet high. I'm sorry, I'm looking at some slides. So this is really an overbuilt unit, because again, I wanted this to be shared in the community and actually not require a food bank vehicle or driver. So it's built to be towed by any large SUV or pickup truck that has electric brakes. In other words, if you have a large boat or a camper, a landscaping trailer, or construction trailer, you can easily tow this. I'm sorry, I have a couple of things going on here. So this is the unit, and some of the things that were overbuilt, again, we have, assuming it was going to be used by some community drivers. Now, the drivers would be vetted, the vehicles would be vetted, but they have to sort of be listed with the food bank. But once the trailer is placed, let's say they're sharing this between some programs, they can move it within their community themselves, which to me was very important, because otherwise you end up in that same old rut where everything depends on the food bank driver schedule and so on. So a couple of features about the trailer. It is CoolBot. Yep, good. It's CoolBot driven, which means if you look in this shot right to the front of the trailer, basically you're looking at 2 air conditioners, and those little black boxes that are kind of right under the air conditioners, up there, are the CoolBot units. And if you don't know what CoolBot is, it's simply an electronic brain that overrides the circuitry in the air conditioner and fools it into dropping to 38 degrees or wherever you set it. This to me was a key component from the get-go, even before I was thinking of a trailer, just doing a stationary one. The CoolBot makes it affordable. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the CoolBot, but I had not run into it being used in a mobile application before. So this is, like I said, it's very overbuilt. We've got a welded aluminum floor. You see the E-track load strips on the side so you can lock in pallets. And the 2 air conditioners, I was kind of right on the edge of needing 1 or 2. And again, I wanted this to be overbuilt so it would have no issues. So that's what you're looking at there, the 2 CoolBot units, and we're basically looking in through the back door. You can sort of see the man door on the side. This particular design will do about a payload of about 7,200 pounds, but the axles were over-spec'd, heavy-duty axles. The insulation is about R28 for efficiency. The walls you're looking at are FRP panels, food safe, fiber reinforced plastic. There's work lights in there. A couple of upgrades that I felt were necessary, especially if it was going to be shared from one agency to another and take some wear and tear. You can go ahead and click forward. This was first distribution, was a mass distribution in downtown Syracuse. You can see folks gathering. We had 2 units here. The one you're looking at we had more freezer product actually, which these aren't necessarily designed to be a freezer, but when you put product in at 10 or 15 below zero and you're able to have those units run ambient air at 38, we were only trying to get the product to hold for this 1 day distribution, and believe me, things were still frozen solid in there at the end of the day. And then the other trailer was between those two brick buildings where we actually had the tents and everything set up for the distribution. So basically what happened that day was that they were able to put 7,000 pounds of perishable goods and, you know, and increase the variety of that distribution that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So that was definitely a win-win day. Some of the criteria, we do have a partner agency agreement. You know, when are we going to place it, drop it? You need some site requirements. Those CoolBot units, the refrigeration, by the way, the CoolBot units save you about $6,000 per trailer in cost. The commercial refrigeration that accomplishes, I would say more, not just the same thing. I mean, a commercial unit has a better recovery rate, so you can open and close the door a lot. Like if you're in a restaurant and you're using a cooler that you're walking in and out of every 10 or 15 minutes, you need that. But these are really designed to hold product until you have a distribution, or maybe you're going to go out behind the pantry and stock up your pantry, you know, every hour or so. Perfectly efficient for that. A supply chain plan. These trailers, the versatility was important, so we, you know, put a couple of options out there. We can deliver it loaded, we can park it empty, and when we do grocery rescue or retail rescue in the area, that product can be delivered in that area. And by the way, our 11 county service area, you're 4.5 hours from one end to the other. So there are a lot of situations where, you know, we send a truck out, and sometimes that grocery rescue product would have to come all the way back to the warehouse to be handled and then just go back out again. So this way we can do some localized kind of satellite drop-offs to the unit. Again, just keeping the product there and doing less road time. So how are you going to get, you know, what's the supply chain? Are we going to drop it off loaded? Is it going to be pallets? Is it going to be packed boxes? So on. Volunteer scheduling. That was kind of the one hurdle that I didn't see coming, not just volunteers, but there's a little bit of a paradigm shift when you're a program and you're getting all of your food delivered, and maybe, oh, I can take 200 pounds of perishables. Well, now you have a few thousand pounds that you can have for 3 to 4 days or a week or however long the product will hold. It's very much a paradigm shift to some of these programs on how they operate. So that is taking much more hand holding than I foresaw. So if there's anything in retrospect that I would have worked more on in the beginning, it would be that, you know, those program changes that they're willing to do, but sometimes there's cold feet about change, which you can imagine. The vehicle driver option, like I said, we have a vehicle, we can drop it off and pick it up, or do you want to have somebody in your community on a list so that you can operate it or come get it when it's most convenient for you? And then coalitions, which is a nice option that is representing probably, I don't know, at least 30 or 40% of the folks who commit to getting a unit. Is you'll have a larger program or agency that will work with 4 or 5 of the smaller agencies in the area to help burn off that large amount of perishables and help them move it. Go ahead, Liz. Wait, is that it? Or did I? Yeah. Okay.
Peter.
Yep, there we go. I made it. I was ready to go another 5 or 6 slides. Come on.
So Peter, well, first of all, somebody texted in and said, bravo on the innovation for the mobile refrigerator unit. especially
right.
the design and use. So people are impressed for sure. Can you talk a little bit? I think you might have touched upon this, but I think what the important thing is in our rural food bank assessment, there were people who were using some of like these outside storage units.
Yep.
But what I thought was unique to yours was that they, I think, had commercial refrigeration, and this is running off AC. So can you just talk a little bit more about what kind of electrical that you need and really kind of hammer in that? I know you mentioned the cost savings, but why this would be more efficient over, having some sort of reefer unit.
Sure. Yeah. And again, cost was the first issue. I wanted to stay within budget and have it do the job efficiently, but boy, I would have gotten a lot less trailer if I had to spend, $7,000 or $8,000 on just the refrigeration unit. And they're wonderful. You can get them from Carrier. You can get them powered 110 volts or 120, which is what's attractive about the CoolBot and the air conditioner is you're just plugging in an air conditioner. So if I do recommend a 20 amp circuit. But even if you have a 15 amp circuit, you can run one, just unplug one of those units, and just to underscore, this is a little overbuilt. If for a 16-foot trailer, I probably could have got away with one, but I did not want this thing to have a chance of failure, especially in August. So I went with 2 units. But yeah, the power requirement is just regular plug-in. Now you could throw a generator on the tongue. We considered that, but we don't really have a situation where we thought it would be parked where there was no access to power. But those are some other ways you can go. And as far as the efficiency of it, like I said, it's I don't think it would be $1 or $2 a day. It's whatever your air conditioner would cost you.
Gotcha. And one person wrote in, they wanted to know, so what was the complete cost for just one unit? Was it 25,000?
Yeah, I did stay, I was like $1 under budget. I think it was very tight, but you have to keep in mind, like I said, it has all those heavy duty upgrades, and that includes our graphic. Those graphic wraps are about $2,000 or $2,200. So before we got into any of that sort of peripheral stuff, I think it was right around 20,000 or 21 for a 16-foot. Again, this is sort of a Cadillac. What we're hoping is that when folks use this, they'll realize, hey, we can go on Amazon, we can find an inexpensive enclosed trailer, insulate it ourselves, and you could come up with a very useful, food safe unit. But again, when you're partnering with the DEC, you got to have a little of the flash and a guaranteed operation. So the idea can be achieved for less, for sure.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for sharing. I just thought that was so innovative and so appropriate for this work that they're doing in California. And it really helps because we have a lot of nutrition educators on the call as well, for them to be thinking about what are some of the challenges that food banks have in serving more nutritious food, right? And this is a great solution for storage and transportation.
Sure, my pleasure.
So next we have Sherry Atwell from Feeding Florida. And Sherry, I think, has a really great story to share as well on the positive partnership side of our findings, and how she and the Food Bank Association partnered with government entities to kind of raise themselves up as not only folks who can serve the charitable food network, but that their infrastructure is a key player in disaster relief too. So I'm going to turn it over to Sherry.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Again, I am Sherry Atwell, and I'm the Director of Food Recovery for the State Association, also known as Feeding Florida. You can go to the next slide, Liz. And she's about to put up a map of our lovely state. As you guys can see, we are a very long state. In our state, if you look at Feeding the Gulf Coast, that top quadrant of the state is more rural communities. And then as you go farther south, We have a very vast differing population from rural to very urban. Like Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach is like feeding a small country. We joke, but up in that Panhandle area, Second Harvest of the Big Bend, feeding the Gulf Coast, Gateway, those are all our really rural food banks. And as everybody's probably well aware, Irma was a storm that hit basically every single one of our 67 counties in the state of Florida. Our association is a 13-member association. Each county has an associated food bank. We have about 22, the number's changing daily, but anywhere around 2,300 agencies found throughout our entire state acting as distribution points for our network. We have about 100 trucks ranging from small box trucks to 53-foot trailers that are all refrigerated, that played key parts during our response to Irma. And then we have about 500,000 square feet of warehousing space with a very wide range of facilities ranging from 2 high racking all the way to 5 high racking, with cooler space, freezer space, cool docks around the state. We do everything from cooler, freezer to shelf stable. If you want to go to the next slide. Feeding Florida serves on the Florida State's Emergency Response Team as a part of the Emergency Function 6 Mass Feeding Coordination with our statewide network of food banks. As the organizing the network, in our response to Irma, we got ahead of the game. We have a strike team that we created that hosted daily calls as the strike team as the storm was several days out. In the process of that, we did an inventory of our what we had on hand and then what we were projecting that we might need across the state. We also started coordinating a database of our agency partners with a very master contact list so that we could be able to navigate, have a master contact list for that exchange of information, because we just weren't really sure where the storm was going to hit. I don't think people really the track changed so often. The storm was slow coming in, but it was building strength, and so we had to be prepared, and data was key for that. And then just so that we could have support within our own network with the strike team, it allowed for overflow of communication. And then in the process of that, we began coordinating with Feeding America when we were realizing what our inventory needs were. They were a key partner for us because they have such wonderful relationships with national partners as well, so we could start putting in our orders of what we were projecting that we thought we would need. You can go to the next slide. So prior to the landfall, we did pre-staging of food. What that meant was we leveraged partnerships at the statewide level with the state emergency response. We had 11 truckloads of water and 6 truckloads of MRE staged. We staged them in 3 locations, our Big Bend, which is up in Tallahassee in that top quadrant of the state. We also positioned trucks down in Central Florida at our Second Harvest of Central Florida. That's in Orlando. And then All Safe Food Bank is in Sarasota because we wanted to be able to get some food south of Central Florida to be able to navigate and pivot it depending on where the landfall went. We did leverage, like I mentioned, Feeding America for the partnerships, and we had 387,000 pounds of food from the National Food Manufacturer donations placed within 7 locations throughout our state within that 13-member network. And then approximately 262,000 pounds of food from network members, meaning food banks across the country to include Texas. So we were, if everybody remembers, Harvey had just hit. We were several weeks out from that, and Feeding Florida had helped assist Texas. So when Irma hit us, they were so wonderful and reciprocated to us. So if you want to go to the next slide. If you kind of look at the scenario, we had like a pre-storm situation where we had our strike team, we prepared. We had our post-landfall situation, which was basically where the storm had hit and we needed to figure out how to get food out to people very quickly. The response, there was no gas. We needed people to be able to kind of turn food on a dime, and you have to remember people had undergone severe damage in most, in a lot of areas of the state. So in the distribution data, it's kind of, when you look at it, all collaborated now, it's pretty amazing what our network did within that very short amount of time. We moved 5.8 million pounds of food throughout the network that was from Feeding America and the partnership there. We worked with FEMA, the Department of Agriculture, and then the Feeding Florida. We had a collaboration with them. It was the first time ever that Feeding Florida's members had been a part and had a seat at the table with these, with the state agencies as well as with FEMA. We took 35 truckloads of food boxes totaling 66,565 boxes across 6 food banks. And the total reported pounds of food distributed within 20 days of landfall was 10.2 million pounds. We distributed within 20 days of landfall of water 3.9 million half-liter bottles of water. So as you can see, it's really important to go ahead and have collaboration. We're currently in an exercise with the state emergency response team now in preparation for this upcoming hurricane season. So we're working as part of the ESF6. We are currently going in a fake hurricane and staging food, fakely, and doing a whole simulation basically, so that what we learned from Irma, what we didn't learn from Irma, that kind of thing. You want to go to the next one? So our coordination continues, like I just said. We're still working with the emergency state teams, dispersing remaining emergency food around the state due to short expiration dates. We did see that we would have these response boxes and everything would have long shelf life except for one item. So it's super important now that we distribute that food so it doesn't go to waste. Our food banks picked up all freight costs along the way for Irma response. And we've moved 38 truckloads as of March 28th of those short-term expiring dates after landfall, meaning the response was done for Irma and they had excess food that we allowed into our network to help distribute so it wouldn't go to the landfill. And then just things to note, we're currently working with a consulting firm to analyze our response to Irma and see how we can build upon that success and build a stronger response in case a storm were to come again. We want to make sure that we're kind of cutting edge and more efficient, or as efficient as we possibly can be. And then just something also to note that Second Harvest of the Big Bend, which is our Tallahassee Food Bank, just received $1 million appropriation from our legislature to secure a building for upcoming disaster relief networks. So I know as some of you guys look, part of the call here today is for rural food banks. They are a rural food bank up in the Panhandle, and they actually use this as leveraging power for fundraising for disaster response. So it helped allow them to secure their building. And then just lastly, once we get our Irma response from our consultants, we'll be happy to share the findings with you guys. And that's all I've got, short and sweet. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks so much, Sherry. I do have one question that came in. So what would you say, or who is the most important person to contact at the state level for rural food banks to consider how they could leverage their position and their infrastructure to also maybe get appropriations to expand their building, or to justify that it's worth investing in them for disaster relief, but then that they could benefit and help the community throughout the rest of the year if that money was invested?
I am going to try and find his name. Okay, so I would say that the starting point for us to kind of have, so Robin, who's our executive director, was the executive director, or the director over food, nutrition, and wellness for the Department of Agriculture. So she was very vetted, which was also over food, nutrition, and wellness. She handled TFAP and the disaster response for ESF6. So she was very well tapped into the network of the state agency. But the key, I would say, person was the department's emergency coordinator, because they're going to be the hub they're going to be coordinating the Salvation Armies, the Florida Baptists, they're going to be coordinating all the food with the Department of Agriculture. They're going to be the centralized person to navigate and get the seat at the table, because once you can show value and the breadth of your network to them, they're going to have your back and be supportive. So I would say that would be a starting point if you're looking to kind of position yourself in that way. And his title is the Emergency Coordination Officer for State Mass Care. And then from a standpoint of if you're looking at like lobbying efforts, I would just say really know your community of, politicians, and work with, if you're going to invest, maybe invest in a really good lobbying firm to represent you. I know that's maybe not the right thing to say, but unfortunately that's kind of where we are as a society. So know who your legislatures are and have a really good lobbying firm that represents you well to show the breadth of the network.
Thanks so much, Sherry. That's really good advice. We have another question that came in it's more general, but I think it is appropriate to ask you as well, Sherry. Might put you on the spot. So if you don't know, don't.
It's okay.
But
I'll do my very best.
Okay.
Because I was a part of, so my day blue sky job is I do pretty much strictly just the produce sourcing for my 13 food banks. The state appropriates money for each of them to get produce from Florida into Florida food banks. So that's my blue sky job. And then when gray skies hit, it was helping coordinate all the FEMA trucks, all of the state disaster trucks. So we're a really lean staff here. There's only 3 of us, and then we do have a supply chain consultant. So we're a really, really lean staff. So I was basically a part of a lot of it. Obviously, Robin pioneered it and was the head of everything, but I did, witness it all firsthand. So hopefully I can answer your question.
Okay. Well, so this question is about mobile pantries. And given that you work with the produce program, you obviously don't run mobile pantries, but you probably work with the food bank coordinators who do run them in your state. And so folks were just asking, we had mentioned that as a solution earlier. We don't have it as an example.
It was key for us. Okay, so and I didn't include this data as part of my slides, but we as a network, meaning Feeding America, Feeding Florida, all of the associations across the state, it's so key to know where your agencies are and who your big key players are, meaning that it can push food fast, because they're going to typically come online. And that's one of the things that our study is probably going to show the most of is about knowing who your agencies are. So we compiled the list. We actually overlaid that mobile pantry or our agency list with the TSA list for long-term feeding, which I didn't include all of that. But to go back to your question about mobile pantries, it's key to know where they are. And we actually were having to report out to the state daily of where our mobile pantries were. So our agency relations coordinators coordinated with us to let us know. So they were reporting out to us daily where their mobile pantries were going to be located, what time, so that we could do pop-up shops. We were literally just dropping food wherever we could find ways to drop food. So yes, we did absolutely use mobile pantries in the time of disaster.
Great. Thank you. And we also,
and Florida is also doing what New York is doing with the mobile, with the trailers. So I love to see that innovation. I think they shared that with some of our food banks, and we started utilizing that too to increase our output and throughput for food.
That's great. And for anyone else who wants to know more about mobile pantries in general, Terry and folks at the California Association of Food Banks, there are some great mobile pantry examples in California. Peter runs a great mobile pantry program besides this annex, which is a different concept. And it sounds like Sherry has some great examples too. So we'll share everyone's contact information if you're more interested in learning about examples.
And I was going to say, I can put you guys in contact with the actual food banks that were in the areas where those happened at the most volume, if that's something you're interested in. I'm happy to find those contacts for you.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, well, we're down to our last few minutes of the webinar, and thank you everyone for being in there. I just think we have some great examples and things that we could share. So our last presenter is our first presenter. So I'm going to pass it back to Laura, who's going to share a little bit of information about the NPI's online course about nutrition policies. And so as we're working to improve the infrastructure and storage and transportation for the Charitable Food Network, we're all mindful of wanting to make sure that there's healthy food being distributed as well, which in California, it's significantly the majority of the food is that's going through the network is healthy, and we're thinking of more ways to get produce and other perishable foods out there. So I'm going to pass it off to Laura.
Thanks, Liz. As Liz said, I'm going to share about one more approach to improving the healthfulness of food bank inventory, and that is a nutrition policy. And for those of you who are more familiar with NPI's work, some of this may be familiar to you, but we never miss an opportunity to do a commercial for nutrition policies. So strong is our belief in them. So what is a nutrition policy? If you're like us, you hear the word policy and you tend to glaze over and tune out. And there are many policies in this world that really have no meaning or never get used, sit on the shelf. They're a waste of the paper even that they're printed on. But what we mean by a nutrition policy is something different. We mean a process by which a food bank or other organization engages all stakeholders to come up with an official written policy that's a living document. Something that's taken seriously both by the food bank and its affiliated pantries and donors. And a major benefit or importance of the nutrition policy is that it specifies exactly which foods to procure and which foods to reduce. And it also feeds into the inventory systems so that food banks are recording enough about what they receive to be able to keep track of how they are doing with improving nutrition quality. So they're oftentimes a sort of starting point or a formalization of maybe existing practices, and they're necessary, but they're also certainly not sufficient. So we need practice changes as well. And of course, using policies to guide changes in foods provided is definitely not a new concept. So there are, of course, many federal policies that spell out what foods should be available or not available in schools and childcare centers, for example, to improve nutrition quality. Many hospitals, such as Kaiser, have policies for nutrition quality of food served to patients in staff and visitor cafeterias. And we've also seen a growing number of food banks that have adopted policies as well. We did a survey in 2010 that showed about 10% of the regional food banks in the US had formal written nutrition policies, but we've seen quite an interest in policy development since then, and we imagine much higher now. There's a little bit of background noise.
Then he's on a blood pressure med that changed recently, and I kept up on the Tarvestat and bupropion.
Liz, is there someone we can mute,
so
maybe?
I believe
right now. Let's see if I
Hi, we're losing Laura.
Yeah.
I think. All right. Well, it's quiet now, so I'll keep on.
I think that did it.
Okay, great. So what are the benefits of a food bank nutrition policy? Well, we think obviously that there are many, but a major benefit is that food bank nutrition policies provide clear direction to staff, and they also enable consistent decision making. Food bank nutrition policies help to model responsible food provider behavior, and they also serve as a wonderful and clear communication tool. Food bank nutrition policies also signal to clients that the food bank cares and takes seriously their health. We did a study of a nutrition policy at Kaiser, the one that I just mentioned, and employees indicated that they felt looked after by having the policy and thought that it was long overdue. And I'll just introduce a little note here that skeptics sometimes say that the amount of foods clients get from pantries is so small that it couldn't possibly make a difference to their overall diet. But the truth is that all foods that go into a low-income household, and really any household, are either contributing to more healthful eating or the opposite. And so that is one of the reasons why it's important to improve the healthfulness of food bank inventories. So I mentioned that nutrition policies are useful for staff, and here's a quote from one of the food bankers we worked with on a policy, and we've heard similar comments over and over. And the quote reads, "We had an informal policy," in quotes, where we all had kind of had an idea of sourcing more nutritious foods, but when we went around and talked to staff, we found that everyone had a different idea about what that meant. We decided we needed a formal written policy. And again, that is something that we have heard many times. So Liz mentioned that at NPI we have an online course. In just a moment, I'll share the link with you, and we'll also make it available after the webinar. But we have developed a guide for how a food bank or other organization can develop a successful and useful policy. The guide is downloadable, and it includes directions, examples, suggestions, checklists, and more to guide in the development of policy. Stakeholders also need to be an important part of the policy development process, and something that we heard from food banks that we had worked with previously was that providing resources about how to engage stakeholders as well as how to shape the policy development process was really important. So we also have a guide to convening a working group to develop a food bank nutrition policy as well. And here it is, the super easy to write down, that's a joke, link to the MOOC, as we call it. So we will make that available after the fact. Just a few quick stats on the course. It's self-paced. It's meant to take about an hour per week for 6 weeks. So you can do it at your own speed. There are short videos, narrated slide presentations, online discussions, tons of downloadable resources, and one thing that is included as a resource is a set of slides to help you advocate for a food bank nutrition policy or to bring stakeholders into the process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Liz.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. I did just wanted to mention to folks who are on the call that recently Mazone put out a new research summary that showed that food banks across the country, now there's a significant number of food banks across the country who do have written policies, so that there has been quite a bit of work since we all started this. And a lot of the folks that I talk to often across the country are looking for technical assistance on how to create policies. So we have been directing folks to these resources, and they have found them very useful. So we encourage you to share them or use them locally within your community. We just have 5 minutes left, and I want to see if folks have any questions to add to the question box. And while you're thinking about questions, I also want to ask you, given everything that you've learned today on the webinar, between the food bank assessment overview, Peter's sharing of annexes, Sherry sharing how she has partnered and elevated the network in Florida as not only a charitable food assistance, a key player, but also a disaster relief player. What bits of information did you hear today? What do you think you can take back to your local community? And what do you think you can do with that? Or how do you think you could support folks? And go ahead and just type it. And as folks are typing them in, I'll share. And just to recap for folks as you're thinking, I will start to wrap things up. We will have access to the food bank assessment and the instruments that folks were asking about. We will have the new reports from our interviews finished soon and available. We will have the link to the online course, and then we will send out contact information for Sherry and Peter in case you have any information or questions that you'd like to share with them. What we will do is, because everyone who's registered, you had to register with an email, we will get those email addresses from Terry, and we can send all that information out as a follow-up email. Peter or Sherry or Terry or Laura, do you have any final words or anything that you would like to end the webinar on?
This is Terry at CAFB. I appreciate the colleagues from Florida and New York sharing their best practices with us here in California. For those who aren't part of the Food Bank Network who are on this call, I want to let you know that we have, our network has successfully advocated for the past few years to also get state funding directly to go to food banks. And it's called Cal Food, and it will go out through all the TFAP providers across the state funding. And we also are working hard to get an infrastructure asked in the budget. So this is very new. For years, there was no state funding for food banks in the California state budget, like was referenced in New York. But now we're starting to see that funding coming through, and each year we are trying to expand the ask. So I just wanted to let people know who aren't part of the network that there are more funds coming into our network to hopefully improve the infrastructure and sort of address some of the barriers that were identified in the rural and remote food banking assessment.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Well, it is quarter after on the dot, so I am going to say thank you so much to Terry and the California Association of Food Banks for partnering with us to bring you the webinar, and we will be following up soon with the information that we talked about today. Thank you so much to Peter and Sherry and Laura, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you, Liz.